Okay, the first question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge in expanding this kind of interfaith discussions nationwide? So regarding the situation in Singapore, what do you think is the biggest challenge in expanding this kind of interfaith discussion nationwide? Perhaps I'd like to address this to Dr. Hanan, if you'd like to share with us.
I shared with Derek earlier that in MUIS I oversee interfaith engagement dialogue. I also oversee the intra-faith dialogue. And I think they are related, they affect each other. The manner we deal with the others at the interfaith level in somehow is affected also by our own intra-faith dynamics. So if there's one big challenge to me, it's really with the increasing diversity in Singapore, especially, and Singapore is increasingly becoming diverse, and that is not just the inter, but as well as the intra faith, and I suppose this is also the same with the Catholics and other religions. And therefore, we need to deal not only in trying to understand the others, which I think we need to put a lot of effort in trying to understand the others, but also to appreciate our own dynamics, which will have impact on how we also deal with the others. So briefly, I mean, I've said this earlier, I think to begin with is really to start with friendship. I know that probably some of us may have different views, but from my humble experience, I think even however basic that is, I think we need to really forge a true, real friendship. Ability to talk, eat together. Yeah, sometimes we joke. I mean, Jorak and I, we are not just affiliates, but we are friends. We can joke and nudge each other to that degree. I think we need to continue to develop that friendship, and then we'll see.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Okay, the second highest question that's here is very interesting, very practical. What do you think of interfaith marriages, especially between Muslims and Catholic, in the context of Singapore and Malaysia? Is this allowed in the Islamic law, the Catholic law, and by the law of the country? So, okay.
Well, this is partly a question of jurisprudence, but it's also a sociological question, right? So there are different answers. Let me get the jurisprudence out of the way first. In Islamic tradition, the majority view, I believe, is that the marriages, interfaith marriages, between a Muslim man and a non-Muslim, and generally the idea is that the non-Muslim should be, if a non-Muslim, the woman, a non-Muslim woman, should be from the category of people of the book, which would be Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, and so on. That's permissible, right? But then there's a variety of opinions. Many scholars would say that today that rule doesn't apply because of the idea that the Christians and the Jews today, according to this view, are not the same as the Christians and the Jews of the past, who were genuinely people of the book. But they themselves have strayed from that, so therefore it cannot be permitted. But there are differences of opinion on this matter. A marriage between women, a Muslim woman and a non-Muslim man, generally, I think the majority view is that it's not permitted. And I think it has got something to do with what happens, and here we go into sociology of it, what happens to the identity of the children and so on and so forth. So this is jurisprudential, and as I said, but the thing about Islam is that there are always varieties of opinions. There's a majority view. In many cases, there would be a majority view, and there would be a minority view. And it's permissible for people to take the minority opinion on any jurisprudential issue. But the question also said, what do we think about it? What do I think about it? To me, interfaith marriage, just like inter-ethnic or interracial marriages, there is no reason to be for or against it. To me, this is something about preference, about interest. It's about falling in love, basically, right? I don't think one can say that it is something that is good or something that is bad, because it's a wrong kind of question in a sense, right? It's all about compatibility, about interest, about passion. Of course, from a very broad perspective, these kinds of marriages are actually very good, sociologically speaking, because they bring people together. I just met, I don't know whether they're here, but I met a former student of mine who, can I say? Whose husband is part Indian, part Chinese, and the Chinese part is part Peranakan also, right? I think in Singapore we call that Chindian, right? Indian and Chinese. Another one there. Okay. So you see, these are, okay, in this case we're not talking about religion, we're talking about race, right? But it's the same idea. These are the real Singaporeans, right? We know from Peranakan culture itself, centuries of contact and intermarriage and cultural assimilation had resulted in a very distinct culture. Yeah, you could say the same thing about religion. Christianity in India, for example, one of the oldest churches, the Syrian church, the Matoma church. It's one of the oldest churches, but it has taken on a distinctly Indian, and not even Indian, Kerala, it's one of the states in southern India, a distinctively Indian flavor and culture. So I think sociologically speaking, these are all very good kinds of developments, but it's not something that one can, you can't encourage it at one level. We can say sociologically it's very beneficial, but on a personal level, on a jurisprudential level, you get into problems. Yeah. So that's my answer.
Thanks, Farid. Okay, this is a very interesting question here. The aim of the Christian gospel is love. What is the aim of Islam?
Sorry, but I would be interested to know the Catholic's view about
on marriage.
That question. So Muslims have responded to that.
Yeah. On marriage, is it?
Yeah.
On marriage, okay.
Yeah, the question on...
He is the expert.
That one, I have to answer that one. For us, we consulted the head of the Sharia courts. He's a practicing lawyer, I think, in Rajan Tan.
Head of Sharia court?
Yeah.
No. So you're referring to Ahmad Nizam? Who...
But anyway, we consulted him. So
Okay.
he explained, we had our staff to understand the context. So we do have quite a number of Muslim and Catholic marriages. So what we do is we bring the couple in, we explain to them the Sharia background, the inheritance laws. So these are basic knowledge. And then our principle is the freedom of choice. We respect how they choose to want to ritualize their union. In the Catholic Church, we have this canonical form where we call dispensation from the canonical form. So if someone is marrying outside the church can dispense from that and recognize for example, another wedding, let's say in ROM or in the Sharia courts. So we have that facility, but we leave it very much to the couple because they have to decide and work it out between themselves. The practical difficulties that they will face from families, but also within the faith. How do they want to practice the faith? So these are the issues that we would advise, but we will leave it to them to see how best they need to work it out in that context. But we always emphasize the respect of conscience of either party. And so not forcing either one to have to convert to marry in a church or vice versa. So again, I would say we try to leave it very much to the couple to decide how they, for the future of their marriage and for their children. Yeah.
But this concerns couples, say Muslim and Christian boy and girl, who wish to get married but wish to retain their respective faiths.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but when it comes to conversion, that's
a separate issue.
And that is, I think, a very difficult issue.
Yeah.
Right?
So again, conversion, we won't force either way. We wouldn't insist. But although in the old church, before 65, anyone wanting to marry a Catholic had to convert. So again, we have come to this principle of respecting the freedom of choice as a basis for relationships.
Yeah. If I may add, there are different levels or layers of considerations. I think the fundamental ones is really about human relationship, the love, care, respect for each other, so that's one. The second level, as a Muslim, then you have the legal question, the Islamic jurisprudence, the Sharia, if you wish, although it's not strictly the Sharia, but the Islamic law. The third layer is the land law of the land. So in this case, in Singapore, you have the Administration of Muslim Law Act. So we have that dual track, right? So we need to deal with that also, because it cannot be a case where two people get in union, get together, but then one's rights are not protected because of the law. I mean, to give example, for Muslims, we enter into marriage contract according to the Muslim law, and that is by virtue of the Administration of Muslim Law Act, and then we register it in the ROMM, Register of Muslim Marriages. Now, once you follow that track, so subsequently you have to follow. So you go to the Sharia court, right? But if you so decide to register from a civil marriage, then you're registered with ROM, then that's a different track. So we need to understand the legal implication of where you stand. I'm not in a position to talk about Malaysia, probably Prof. Farid is better informed, but that also you need to consider. Yeah, we need to consider. And it cannot be a case where sometimes we have Muslim couples got married into a marriage in Batam, then in Golok, Thailand, or elsewhere, in the mosque, where an imam sort of, following the Islamic law. But then it is not legal. It's not recorded, it's not registered anywhere. And therefore, if anything happens, God forbid, you've got no laws to protect and to defend your rights. It is also not possible. So we don't say that, okay, you can go there and get imam to solemnize you and then you are married. No, it cannot be that case, because you need also to, decades ago I remember few imams solemnized couple. In the building where I was the head of that building. I do not want to mention the name. And then I learned that this thing's happening here. And I've got to tell the ustaz, hey guys, this is not just simply you follow the Islamic law and then you solemnize, then the couple, their husband and wife. There's law to that. So that is also the next layer that one needs to consider, because at the end of the day, your rights must be protected. If anything happens, then you must make sure that you are well covered, defended for that.
That's one of the things we explain to the couples, depending on what track they want to take and the consequences that follow. Yeah, so that they are fully informed, so that when they make a choice, it would be an informed choice. Yeah.
But the reality of things, the way things are on the ground, is that generally, I think, if you look at all the different religions, Muslims have tended to be more insistent on conversion. I think you all know this, right? So it becomes a tug of war, actually. When you have a boy and a girl who want to get married, one of them is Muslim, most of the time the Muslim side wins, right? No, I'm not making a judgment about this. I'm just explaining the reality of it, right? So what it means is, I think non-Muslims would tend to be more okay with being in an interfaith marriage where both retain their respective religions, and then they might decide to leave the religion up to the children, to leave it up to the children, or maybe they may decide that the children will follow one of the parents. They may make such a decision, but otherwise they are happy with being in a mixed faith marriage. I think Muslims tend to be less happy with that. So throughout history, whatever the country is, where you have a mix of religions, generally you find that there will be conversion. And even in Islam, when Islamic law allows a mixed marriage between a Muslim man and a non-Muslim woman, in many Muslim countries, there is Islamic law, which is transnational, but each Muslim country would have its own enactments of Islamic law. There they would make extra provisions that whether it's a man or a woman, they should convert to Islam if there is conversion, if there is marriage. There's as I said, a minority jurisprudential position which allows for mixed marriages. And I think, to be honest with you, I think we have a longer way to go in terms of coming around to your position where you don't force and you leave it up to the couple. I think it's going to be a little, although this is debated in the community, but I think we are further away from that.
Yes, although we have those principles, sometimes family feelings and all that are realities that we have to deal with. So, Bishop Ruben, there's one question here that might be interesting. How can we be proactive and comfortable about inter-religious dialogue? How can we be proactive and at the same time be comfortable about inter-religious dialogue? Maybe from your experience in living in Istanbul. Yeah.
The first step is to be there, to be among the Muslims. Yes. No, it's serious because we cannot imagine what they are, what they do. Has to know directly. Then there are some ways for developing, encouraging these relationships with the others, Muslims. For me, the attention for the prayer is very important. I know that in Turkey, the Muslims appreciate a lot the presence of the Christians in the mosque, even if they know that we don't pray the Muslim prayer. If we are there, we can be respectfully in silence, maybe praying also in silence, but be together. This is very important because they recognize the appreciation that the Christians have for them. Also, being with them in the feast, Ramadan, sacrifice feast, and other feasts that they celebrate. When we go to the house or in the meeting with them, at least the Turkish people, and I know the other people, Muslim people, welcome us very well, always. And this create confidence, friendship. Then we can talk about the traditions. We ask why you celebrate, for example, the sacrifice feast, and it's a tradition. And like that, we can open the possibilities for other subjects for talking. And this is a friendship that we can create. If I arrive in one Muslim country, I was in Pakistan or in Dubai, but we can be there in commercial malls, but without relationships, it has to be together with them. This is my experience. And then we can deep more subjects about the religions, but it's not the first time, the first moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Bishop. It's more a dialogue of life that we share common experiences and celebration.
It's the basis.
Yeah. Okay, Derek, a nice theological question here. Does it matter to my salvation, if I'm Catholic or Muslim, if humanity comes before religiosity? Oh. Let's hope our money is worth.
Can I stay silent for the next 5 minutes? Well, thanks for the question. Yes. Humanity before religiosity, I think, could be our mantra for encountering. Like you're talking about dialogue of life. And in one of the church documents, it talks about the 4 dialogues, which is the dialogue of life, where that's what we're doing now, the dialogue for action, where we work together for social justice. There's also the dialogue of theological exchange, where we start talking about doctrines and dogma. And there's also the dialogue of spiritual experiences, where we talk about prayer, faith, mystical prayer. So I think we're talking about different dialogues. So if you want to talk about humanity before religiosity, I really think we're talking about the dialogue of life, where we share life first, that we welcome one another in our houses, and we are basically friends and brothers to one another. Then you want to talk about whether salvation, that goes into the dogmatic range, the realm of doctrine and dogma. And that will be the dialogue of theological exchange. And that will be the subject of our next conference. No, okay.
You can't get away so easily.
Yes. So I have got to be... so, like we say, we have got to dialogue authentically. Yes, yeah, we have to dialogue with authenticity. And what that means is to actually hold on to what we believe. And as Catholics, we believe that Jesus Christ is our Savior. And so, therefore, in dialogue, we have to honestly say what we believe. And then, as we respect what other religions profess, we also expect that mutual respect for what we believe in, and just to listen and to accept, and then to continue to understand. And I think for us Catholics, we tend to, after a while, especially after the Second Vatican Council, because in Lumen Gentium and Gaudium et Spes, in the past, we always sometimes say, outside the church, there is no salvation. And then with the Second Vatican Council, we say that there are rays of truth in other religions. And then we always take that as, all religions are the same. But we also mention very strongly about conscience. And so therefore, God speaks to us with our conscience, and at the end, God judges our conscience. After saying all that, we still have to proclaim that Christ is the unique Savior for us Christians. And I think Pope John Paul II wrote Dominus Jesus to actually continue to remind Catholics that I think all religions are the same. This is too diluted and wishy-washy. We have to stand for what we believe in. And if we believe that Jesus Christ is our Savior, we have to profess it and proclaim it, but without offending the other. And I think that's where the humanity and fraternity before religiosity comes in. And to say, I'm saved, you're not. So you have to come across. And I think what St. Francis did about crossing over to encounter, that's an example. To be brother and then to be minor. So therefore, he really lived out his friar minorhood to the full. And to be able to dialogue first and then to be transformed. He transformed himself and then transformed the other. Basically to transform into lovers of God. And I think if we can dialogue authentically, how come I cannot get that word correct today? If we can dialogue with authenticity, I think Francis became, we can say, a better Catholic. And maybe also say that the Sultan also appreciated his own faith better. And I think that's what marriage also is supposed to do. We talk about diversity, and we should appreciate diversity because the other makes us question our own. And from the beginning of time, I mean, with male and female, already very different, right? So the questions about husband and wife today is not very different from that of before, because male and female are different. And so when we see another, it's not a challenge or a threat, but it's actually an invitation to know myself better, and also an invitation for the other to know me better. So in diversity, we can actually become stronger, more authentic. And I think that's the road we are invited to walk. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Derek. There's one question that is open to the panel. Sorry.
Do you mind if I
Please,
say
please,
something
yeah.
about that?
Yeah, please.
Who said humanity before religiosity? Oh, it was in your talk. Oh, so that question
Yeah.
comes from that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to say that actually there's no contradiction between humanity and religiosity, right? It depends on how you define religion. Now, if you reduce religion to doctrines and dogma, then you may say that I'm a Christian first, or I'm a Muslim first, then other things, right? Then I'm Malay, or then a Chinese, or a Malaysian, or whatever. You may say that. But at another level, what does the word religion mean? It comes from the Latin term which means something about ties that bind, right? Now, if you understand religion at that level, you understand religion at the level of morality, at the level of values, at the level of the 33 attributes of God that you had mentioned in your talk, or the 99 attributes of God that Muslims speak about. If you understand religion at that level, then religion is humanism. It is about humanity. It's about respect for fellow human beings. It's about the dignity of life and so on and so forth. So there's no question of contradiction. If we understand religion to be in those terms, then I will say, because this also relates to an earlier question about the challenges of interreligious dialogue in Singapore. I think our dialogue in Singapore for many years has been too safe, and in some ways meaningless. You see, we can't go on and on for the next decades merely proclaiming our love for each other and saying that we have the same values, we have the same idea. We can't go on with that. First of all, we can't go on because it's boring, right? And the other thing is, we know these things. As people are more educated and there's more interaction, people know these things. And more importantly, there are things going out there in the world that demand our attention. For example, I'm not interested to learn from the Buddhists about how moral they are, because I know it already. But while Buddhist monks are preaching about how they love peace, look at what's going on in Myanmar, right? Literal genocide. Now, I know that Buddhism is not to be blamed, but I need to understand how certain Buddhist monks, like this guy called Wiratu, how hatred spews from, how he engages in hatred and hate speech against Muslims. That's what I need to understand, because that's what is going on. And what goes on in Myanmar is going to paint a negative picture of Buddhism. And I want to engage in dialogue to avoid that negative picture. So we need to talk about the bad things that are going on. Same thing with Judaism, right? I've no problems with Judaism. Utmost respect for Jews, right? But Israel is another matter. But in interreligious dialogue in Singapore, you can't say anything against Israel because it's seen as political. You can't say anything against, you can't talk about Myanmar, about the Rohingyas, because that's seen as hurting the feelings of the Buddhists, and so on and so forth. I think we have to grow up. We have to go beyond that. We have to be frank and talk, what do you call it, honestly and frankly about what is going on in the world out there. There's a lot of discussion on Islamic, so-called Islamic or Muslim extremism, right? Because a lot of terrorism is committed in the name of Islam. But we don't talk enough about Christian fundamentalism. We don't talk enough about how Muslim reaction, Muslim extremist reaction, is to a large extent, or to a great extent, is a reaction to the politics of the Christian right. Especially a particular version of the Christian right, which is Christian Zionism. And I'm very clear that is to be distinguished from the lofty humanitarian and peaceful ideas of Christianity. Christian Zionism is a distortion of that. It's a distortion of Christian teaching. Just as certain forms of Muslim fundamentalism, certain forms of Salafism, certain forms of Wahhabism are distortions of Islamic teachings. But we should be free in dialogue to talk about that. And when we talk about each other's, what do you call it, dirty linen, right? We talk about each other's dirty linen, then we'll trust each other more. But if we're only going to say very beautiful things about our respective religions, it means we're hiding something. We're hiding the bad stuff that is going on in our backyards. So I think the challenge is to take dialogue to the next level in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you.
I've always felt fundamentalism is a great threat to peace, whether it is in religion or politics. This attitude of fundamentalism, which rears its ugly head in different forms, and that's where a serious conversation, study and education and real dialogue bring us to realize where the root cause of the problem, and not just use a one-liner to blame any religion for anything. I suppose one last question that would be, I'm sorry I can't address all. One was on Jerusalem, so as you say, it's political, so we won't touch it. But it's an important because it affects all of us. But the question is about youth. How do we bring our youth into interreligious dialogue more in Singapore? I'm glad to see so many young faces here today. I think they should be encouraged and recognized. Thank you for coming. So the question is the future of our society and where our youth, what is their, how do they sort of see Singapore as something that's important for them, that they have a stake in it, and maybe inter-religious dialogue is an important branch of this discussion, of nation building even. Anyone from the panel? Yeah, a young one.
I'm the youngest, huh? Okay. I think the young do not have. I'm not. I think they don't have as much historical baggage, and I think they live in a culture which is more open to differences. And I think those are parents here can also say that they're very open to a lot of things. Sometimes we're quite worried what kind of things they're involved in, but they're just very open. And I think because of that openness, hopefully that can also translate to openness to diversity, to others. And for me, action, I also think that the young want to do something. So the dialogue of action is actually a very good starting point, so that we can work on something that we don't have to get so polemical until we become friends. Then we can start talking about some of the difficult issues because we trust one another. So the friendship is built, and then we know that when we say something that doesn't look very nice, it is not an attack on the person or your faith or something you deeply believe in, but I sincerely want to know. So there's this mutual dialogue, but I first think that the sharing of life and acting together for a common good cause like social justice, moral welfare, can be a starting point to gather people. And I think in Mostar, we were visited, Fray John Wong was our custos, our local superior, is part of our the International Franciscan Movement for dialogue as well, and he was recently in Mostar, and he invited a friar who's actually working where in Bosnia and Mostar, where the Catholics, Orthodox and Muslim youth actually live together for a week, and to live together, to work together, and to just to know one another. And at the end of the whole thing, they go back with each other's handphones and they continue to contact one another. And I think that's a way to go, to actually to share life, work together, and then start to see how the older ones can direct certain dialogue, which is a bit more tricky and more polemical, but in a safe environment. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, for those of you all who are not aware, Father John Wong is leading a group of young Muslims and Catholics or Christians, and also non-Christians, maybe young and not young at heart, young at heart, on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land at the end of this month, to Damietta, to Jerusalem, to the West Bank. So it will not be easy regarding with the visa and all the circumstances in the Holy Land, but you are there with our prayers. We hope you'll find a very fruitful time together. So on that hopeful note, maybe we finish this phase, or Dr. Hassan would like to have a concluding comment from anyone?
Yeah, a very quick one. I was able only to, I was given less than a minute to, I mentioned humanity before religiosity. Obviously that requires a conference. I agree with Prof. Farid with regard to the idea of religiosity. But I share Frederick's statement just now. It's really first about developing that friendship and trust before we even engage in such a discussion. In my other platforms, I discuss all these tough questions, salvation, Israel, and so on. It's just like a month ago, Jewish, Rabbi, Muslim, and Muslim, we've got the Sunni and Shi'i, and then we've got the Catholics, and then we've got the Protestant of different schools. We were around the table and we were arguing and we were talking about difficult questions like salvation, violence, and so forth. I'm not saying that is not important. It's again about facing and with whom we are engaging. So I believe that developing that mutual trust with each other is important. Before then we engage. So if I hold certain views, you look at me not as your enemy, but as your friend in this journey. So it's really about facing. It's about knowing your audience with whom you talk to, And I truly believe that we ought to continue with developing that friendship, yes. And just to share a bit, I mean, with my other colleagues at other platforms, we're also developing a program, a framework where we discuss all these difficult issues with certain ways, methodology, framework. Yeah. Until that happens, I'm not able to offer that program yet here, but I hope that you will be able to bring that in Singapore, and then we'll engage in a different level of interfaith dialogue. Yeah. So let's continue with this conversation. Let's continue with this friendship. Know each other, your friends are beside you, not only even with your other, the religious other, but even within our own fraternity. Sometimes we also do not know our fellow Catholics or our fellow Muslims, and we do not develop that trust, and therefore the intra-faith tension and dynamics.
Thank you. Thanks. If then we invite our panel to take their seats there for the concluding sessions. Before we close, as a closing thing, we have a poem that is written by one of our participants here. I'd like to introduce her. Her name is Anne Lee Su Peng. She's a secular Franciscan, a lay Franciscan. She's a retired senior lecturer in the English department at NUS. She's a poet, and it's also one of the Singapore Cultural Medallion recipient. She has composed a poem, and especially for this occasion. And I'd like to invite her to recite her poem. Anne, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to read my poem. It's such a tremendous privilege, and I'm sure many of us here have been very happy to be at this session today. I hope this sums up. It summed up my thoughts about looking forward to this session, and I'm quite amazed that things mentioned in my poem, which was written in June, touch upon many of the things that were said today. Encounters, 1219 to 2019. As men fought men and turmoil reigned, a little poor Christian went to see a Muslim king. The visit was perilous, the outcome unsafe. All he had was the armor of faith. He took with him one friend, Illuminato, to translate and enlighten where they were to go. He carried no tribute, no present of gold, but his gifts were the richest in the world. He brought his lifeblood, the hallmark of kin, to entrust to this brother whom he believed in. When kindred souls meet, the impossible may happen. Sun and moon, west and east, experience no division. In dialogue, courtesy and courage embraced and entered history as an event of great grace. Two diverse worlds cohered in one truth by honoring the divine pulse at the heart of all life. When good responds to the good in the other, peace builds a fast track from brother to brother. Time has not dulled this story, we know, an astonishing meeting never seen before. And see it again and again we must. Past disbelief, apathy, wars, spirits unrest. That humankind know we are creatures birthed from one loving creator who made this earth. That all creation is family, and have but one home, to share our blessings till time be done. Everyone different, yet all are one. Two holy men, set on their different paths, proved the ever-sustaining hope of peace is love. Thank you.